Running Light Ministry podcast is brought to you by listeners like you. You can support these podcasts by making a gift to the ministries at runninglight.org.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Better Pleasure podcast. My name's Beau.
I'm Peter.
And this is episode number, I'm going to make sure I know which one it is. It's episode 125. That's nice. Where we're at, 125. And we are going to talk a little bit about abortion today. And it's kind of a hot button topic again.
Yeah. And
there's been a lot of grievous videos that have come out lately. We had a person call the office here the other day, and they said, "Hey, did you see the big sign that's at downtown?" And I was like, "No." And they're like, "Man, there's this huge sign downtown. It says like, abortion now." And it's like huge. And I was like, "Whoa, okay, I didn't know." I wondering if the mayor like allowed that or what, or someone just like,
I'm sure she's cool with it.
Put up a big old picture.
Yeah, based on our mayor, I would say she's definitely cool with it, if not behind it.
Yeah, so anyway, and then they said, yeah, and on one of the streets kind of close to downtown, there's this vending machine looking thing that is like, kind of an abortion now pill kind of center. And women were out there like getting their pictures taken with it, like, yeah, the kind of thing. And it grieved this person, and it happened to be a male who was calling and saying, "Man, I was really grieved to see those ladies, kind of like cheering it on." And there's this clip on the Instagram by this Benny Johnson, and it says, "These are, quote, normal people," and you have these women, and they're chanting. It says, "We are taking abortion pills forever." That's the banner, behind them. And then they're just kind of, doing their chants, abortion pill.
So this is them chanting.
Yeah,
right
and then they're taking the pills.
Jeez.
And so, they're popping the pills and they're laughing and they're joking, and it's like a funny thing.
Yeah.
And so, the guy who called, of course, was real grievous, and and of course there's it's hard to watch some of this stuff, especially when you see it so people so jokingly going about it, and then I watched with my wife today this really cool kind of it's some council, and let me see if I can find it. The person who put it on Instagram was Yvette Bronx, and I'm not sure exactly what context this delegation's taking place, but it's really cool. I'm going to turn it up so people can hear it, and then I'd like to get your reaction to this a little bit, and then we'll talk about your thoughts.
Yeah.
Okay. What does that organization do?
I'm the co-executive director of Florida Access Network.
Okay. Well, our hearing outline said other. So the Action Network strongly supports legalized abortion, right?
Correct.
And help me understand the position of your organization. These are simple yes or no questions. Is it okay to murder a 10-year-old child?
No one should be forced to remain pregnant if they don't want to.
Is it okay to murder a 10-year-old child? Yes or no?
I am deeply offended that you would call me a murderer.
I'm not calling you a murderer, ma'am. I'm asking you a question. Is it okay to murder a 10-year-old child? This is about your organization's position. Would they say yes or no?
My organization's position is that no one should be forced to remain pregnant if they don't want to, and any abortion restrictions are...
Okay. Let me answer the question for you. I'm assuming that you do not advocate for the murder of children. Okay. What about a toddler? I assume you would say it's not okay to murder a toddler either, a 2-year-old. What about a newborn? Let me ask you this, the position of the organization. Are you for partial birth abortion? Is that the position of the organization? Would you support that?
What my organization is for is to support the people who need abortion care, who are lied to when they are sent to alleged pregnancy resource centers patients
would that apply to a woman who is 9 months pregnant?
I disagree with the premise of your question.
Would you support the abortion of a late term unborn child?
Anybody should have the right to have an abortion at any time and for any reason.
That's what I need. So here's the thing. I'm just trying to understand the logical fallacy. So if we would not support, and I mean this sincerely, and this is not for you personally, I'm talking about the organization. You support an advocacy organization. If it is not okay to take the life of a small child outside the womb, why is it okay to take the life of a small child 9 inches up the birth canal, inside the womb? What is the distinction? Help me understand the distinction of that.
I don't understand the question.
If you would not support the murder of a small child, right? No one would. No civilized person would. Why do we support the taking of a life of a child right before they're delivered?
No civilized person should support forced pregnancy.
Does abortion take the life of something that's alive?
No one should be forced to remain pregnant against their will.
Ma'am, you're not answering my questions. Let me ask the doctor on this screen. Is it okay, or let me ask you this, does abortion kill something that's alive, take the life of something that's alive?
Sir, the way that you're asking these questions actually intentionally invite violence and harassment to both of us, to all of us.
I'm sorry, that is an absurd response. You're a medical doctor. Tell me if if there's an unborn child in the womb or not. Are we killing something that's alive? When you dismember something in the womb, is that a human being or not? It's a living being, yes or no?
I'm here to talk about medical care.
Yes, this is a direct question about medical.
Yeah, interesting.
So I thought it was interesting, not only the head of the organization or the speaker for the organization, the way she answers it, because it's very much reminded me of just college activism.
Right.
And it's funny how even when they talk to the doctor, that sounds very much like it too.
Right. They refuse to answer the question.
Yeah, it's very much again a college university indoctrination. It feels like they just got spit out of the farm of university, stuff.
Right. And this is like a classic, it's not just someone who's an activist, but it's like a political question. So if you ever listen to politicians answer questions, if they know that the answer is bad, like whatever answer that they have, if they know it's a bad answer, you'll see them avoid the question. And usually what they'll do is they'll answer a different question.
Yeah.
Or they'll answer it in a way that doesn't actually address the issue that's being brought up.
Yeah, and this one's just so blatant, though. It's just so just not even, it's just interesting that human beings can't even answer a question.
Right.
And yet they're supposed to be experts on the subject.
So, yeah, it's a really crazy and serious thing. So this kind of gets into how we develop morality as human beings. And there's a principle in morality that Thomas Aquinas, a Christian philosopher, he made it really prominent. It's called the law of double effect. And that's the idea of if I want to do a moral action, and that moral action necessitates an evil action, but the moral action is greater than the evil it's going to impose, I should still do that moral action. So a good example of this would be if someone came into this office right now trying to kill all of us, and I shot this person or killed them in order to stop them. So the intent of my act is to preserve the life of everyone here, but the effect of my act is the taking of that person's life. So when you hear them answering the question, they're answering it in the double effect format. I'm wanting to not force someone to go through pregnancy.
Right.
So in other words, the moral act that they're trying to preserve is the woman's right not to have to bring the child to term. The effect of that desire is the killing of the child. So there are very few women out there who the desire of the abortion is to kill the child. In other words, there are very few sadistic, malicious women out there who are like, I want to just kill this child.
Right.
Now, they exist, right? There are legitimate murderous people out there who do delight in the taking of human life, especially precious and innocent human life. But they're very rare. You're not going to run into those people very often. So the reason why the majority of people are able to square this in their own mind is because they say, well, I'm not intending to kill the child. I'm intending to live a life free of the child.
Yeah, and in a way, all of us do this.
Right.
All of us use this kind of morality all the time.
Right.
I justify this action and kind of set aside this other negative thing that I'm going to have to do in order to fulfill this other thing that I don't want to happen.
Right.
So that in a sense happens all the time. It's just interesting that we can't, as humans, what I find fascinating about these dialogues is just that humans can't seem to just say what it is.
Right.
We can't just seem to say yes.
Right.
And yeah, we are taking a life.
Right. Where what he's trying to get at, and this is important when it comes to setting up morality, like you said, we don't want to think about it because we want to justify our negative behavior. What he's getting at is he's really trying to do the work of this kind of double effect, because in order to do it, you have to establish that whatever the intent is actually outweighs the effect. And so a woman's ability, which is a good intent, I would say, a woman doesn't want to be pregnant. She doesn't want to have to go through that with her body and to incur the penalties and the obligations necessary to that. But the effect is the killing of a human life. And no amount of liberty for one person can outweigh the loss of life of another person. So this is a really interesting thing. And the way that I've heard it worded to try to justify even this. So some people are willing to really push this on the pro-choice side. And one of the arguments that I heard this week was someone said, well, let's say you're driving down the road and you accidentally run into another person and something happens with their kidneys as a result of the accident. They can't live as a result of damage to their kidneys. And you happen to be a match for their kidneys as a donor. Do you now have the moral obligation to give that person one of your kidneys? And the answer of the pro-choice person was like, no way, you don't have to give away one of your kidneys. That's not right. That's not fair. Obviously, that person is not entitled to one of your kidneys. It's not entitled to the damage it's going to cause your body. So why are you giving the fetus more rights than the person that you would hit with a car? There's obviously several problems with that analogy. The first one is that it would definitely change the way that we looked at the problem if you were the only person that could save that person's life and the accident was indeed your fault. So if I was being negligent on the road and I hit somebody and for some weird reason medical science could not keep that person alive and it was literally dependent on me and my ability to give up one of my kidneys, I would still be alive. I would just be lacking one kidney. I would say, yeah, you do have a moral obligation to give that person your kidney. And if you expand it one more and say, well, what if that person was related to you? Let's say they were your daughter or your son. Would you have a moral obligation to do it? And again, most people would say absolutely. So, and giving up your kidney, by the way, is far more damaging to your body than going through pregnancy, right? So there's many problems with the analogy, but they're getting at the point of I shouldn't have to give this thing up to preserve the life of somebody else. And the answer is yes, you should, right? Because it was your intentional action, right? You had sex, and sex has an effect of making you pregnant, and unless you were raped, which is a very small amount of cases. But for the vast majority of people, it was an intentional act that put you in this position, that created this life. It is your child, right? That life is related to you. You are their mother. And you do have certain moral incumbent obligations and responsibilities to that child as a result. So for those reasons, and then going through pregnancy, while it does have effects on your body, they are reversible effects. They are effects that will go away.
Yeah, so definitely there's a morality shift in the nation on what is really the highest moral morality to uphold.
Right.
Like for instance, life would be the number one thing.
Right.
No matter what, murder's wrong. You
Right.
can't take the life of someone.
Right.
We have to somehow move away a little bit from that in
Right.
order to have this abortion
Right.
thing go on. And that certainly has happened in the country.
And this kind of leads into one of the main things I wanted to talk to you about regarding this issue.
Yeah.
And that is the perspective of responsibility, especially from men.
Yeah, and that's good because I just went over Genesis 25, and one of the talks this morning on the Devo was about just how wouldn't it have been cool if Genesis 25 was just, this is the Abraham had sex with Sarah, and this is his offspring, and this is the family line, but instead there's another wife involved, there's there's concubines,
Right.
there's Hagar, and I just made a mention that, our intimacy sexually has effects.
Right.
It has effects. There's a lot of fathers that don't even know how many kids that they have brought into the world. I mean, there's many men that
Right.
do not know their kids.
Right.
I have a dad. I have 3 dads, but I have one of them who didn't know he had a daughter until like 2 years ago. Didn't even know he had a daughter.
Yeah.
He already has a daughter that he knew of, but he didn't know he had another daughter.
Right.
And I think, man, intimacy certainly does have an effect on lives. And then I thought about abortion too this morning with the Devo, and just how reckless we are,
Right.
as human beings.
Right.
Boy.
And I think that's a really important point to kind of get to. So a lot of people don't know this, but the abolition movement within the United States as well as Western Europe, the idea that we want to abolish the practice of slavery. There were 2 factions within the abolition movement. The first faction was, we want to abolish all slavery right now. The second was incrementalism. They were like, we want to abolish slavery eventually, and we want to work towards it, but there are things in the way, meaning if we abolish it right now, there will be side effects to the country that we're not ready to deal with yet. There are things that might happen to what happens to those slaves in an environment where they're uneducated, they're unprepared to take care of themselves, and they're in an environment that doesn't care about them and thinks of them as second-class citizens. Do we have the resources to support all of them? Do we have the ability and capacity to be able to be with them? And the response of the other abolitionists was, it doesn't matter what kind of consequences we incur, slavery is wrong and it needs to end right now. And I think that there's a similar argument happening within the Christian church right now, this idea of ending abortion, where some people would think abortion is such a grievous ill, it's so evil, it's so bad, we need to end it right now. And then there are certain people on the other side that are comfortable, they're kind of uncomfortable and comfortable at the same time, where they hate abortion, but they see benefits to incrementally shutting it down as opposed to ending it right now. And one of the main reasons why they would say that is, A, because the society at large right now, I think 54% of Americans actually think that abortion should be legal. When you have that many people who think of abortion as a good, the bulk majority of Americans think of it as a good, then if you shut it down completely across the country, there will be side effects. There will be incredible amounts of tension, rioting, and pain that's going to happen, as well as back alley abortions. The second problem is the problem of responsibility. When you have a society that's as irresponsible sexually as ours, shutting down abortion wouldn't actually take away from our irresponsibility. It will have an eventual effect of that, meaning as people get pregnant and they have kids unintentionally, eventually they'll get to the place where they're like, oh, we need to actually take care of these kids. But in the meantime, when our society culture is catching up, you're going to have a lot of children born, and there's not going to be enough social safety nets to be able to lift them up, meaning that some parents are going to be having their kids, they're going to resent their children as a result, they're going to try to take care of them, and eventually they're going to raise them in really unfortunate homes. Now, again, as a Christian, I would say it's better for that kid to live in a bad home than to be killed. But at the same token, we have to address these social issues. So regardless of where you are in that spectrum, if you're like, I want it to happen incrementally, or if I want it to happen right now, you do have to address the idea of the society that we live in.
Yeah.
And the problems of,
which is so cool because and this is why I love our podcast, because man, we touch on so many different cool things, and but this is it. If you're gonna, you know how we get to Huxley's Brave New World,
right,
is through these avenues. Like, say for instance, you do have this stance, and you go, okay, let's stop abortion right now. We're gonna stop it right now. Because the morality within the country is not a, quote, Christian morality, they're not thinking in the Christian worldview.
Right.
That when you stop it, it creates other domino effects.
Right.
That will no doubt be negative, because it's not that everybody's got this worldview biblically thinking.
Right.
Like, they're not thinking like, oh, let me control my sex thing. Let me, and let me control my sex life. Let me, okay, I'm not going to have sex with people anymore. I'm going to, just really be disciplined,
right,
with my sexuality, because that's what I think about sex. I think sex should be very much monogamous, marriage. That's not how our world looks at it,
right,
at the whole, our society in the whole. And so the point being is that I could see that when people in the right intention want to stop abortion now, because the society is not one with a Christian worldview, it pushes again, and this is what happens, it forces government to have to regulate issues, things.
Right.
Because people there's nothing really regulating them in their own heart.
Right.
There's no God, they're not trying to obey God or anything like that. They push God away. They're their own autonomy, that kind of thing, their own autonomous kind of world. And, to me, it's like, you think of, hey, like the answer, like you could say, hey, the answer is this, let's not have sex with people anymore.
Right.
It's like
robots.
That's right.
Yeah.
What's the problem? Let's get robots.
Yeah.
Just masturbate, man. There's plenty of pornography out there.
Right.
Just masturbate away and you'll be fine. And we won't have abortion at all. Now, of course, that doesn't address other issues. You get my point. Is, in a non-Christian worldview, then you're just creating another problem, in a sense, down the road.
Right.
You might get rid of this, but then again, then you have that.
Right.
And is that really the way to go?
Right.
But it pushes human beings to have to, in directions where it seems like humans need government. They need some kind of overseeing thing. That if God's not going to be that, it's going to be something else.
Right. So, John Adams, who was our second president and one of our founding fathers, he made a comment that our system of government, the system of self-government, only works for religious and wise people. So in other words, what he's saying is, unless someone is being governed by some sort of objective law outside of them, namely God, they can be self-governed. But if they don't have that, they need a strong government to rein in their base desires. And there's a philosopher named Thomas Hobbes who had that idea. He wrote a book called Leviathan, where he had this idea that the only way that he's like, humanity is so wicked, that we're so jacked up, that the only way to rein us in is if we had this, the reason why I call it Leviathan is to have this despotic ruler, this monarch who could rein in our evil, basically. So when you look at America, the function of government, the reason why government is praised a lot of times throughout the scriptures, is because of the wickedness of man. You have to remember, when God set up his nation of Israel, he didn't really give it a government. He gave it like some local judges, but there was no king. There was no centralized government. It was just kind of the local community governing itself. It wasn't exactly an anarchy, but it was pretty dang close. And if you've ever read the book of Judges, didn't go too well, right? That form of society was not very functional, because people need something harder than that. They need something to rein in their base desires, or else they do whatever they want. And so I think we're seeing that a lot as a country right now, where we have a system that was literally built for people to be self-governed because they have something higher than the government that is motivating them to work on their virtuous character. But once you get rid of that, which we've done, now we're looking at our society and we're like, oh my gosh, maybe the government does need to be more powerful because people are going a little crazy here. And what's most interesting about this to me, and you and I talk about this often, where a lot of times people frame abortion as a woman's issue. And it's a woman's issue in the sense that obviously being pregnant is going to affect the woman's body more than it's going to affect the man. But a woman doesn't get pregnant without the man, right? The man has to get her pregnant. And because of what God has called men to do, it is more of the fault of the men, meaning it's more of a men's issue than it is a woman's issue.
Yeah, you don't have artificial inseminated females.
Right. It's not like a Brave New World.
Usually at the abortion clinic.
Right. Who had an egg donor.
They're like man.
Yeah. What did I do?
What did I do? You usually don't probably have that.
Usually there's a dude, and usually the dude doesn't even go to Planned Parenthood with the woman. But listen to these statistics. I think this is interesting. So, abortions aside, okay, there's a huge amount of women that obviously are not married that are having abortions. But listen to this. 57.6% of all black children don't have a father at all, biological or step. 31% of Hispanic children don't have a father. 20% of white children are living absent of their biological father.
Wow.
So that's pretty intense, right? Those are pretty intense numbers.
Yeah, so if you combined all the numbers, you're still up to around a 30%.
Right.
So 1/3 of the country doesn't have a dad.
Doesn't have a dad. And it's interesting because, my dad used to talk to me about that because, he grew up without a dad, but he grew up in the 50s where that was more rare. And back in the 50s, he said, and this is true, they had a really derogatory word for people that didn't have a dad. They called them bastards. And you don't really hear that term thrown around too much because that term is only offensive if the majority of people do have dads. But now it's like almost turning a little bit. In the black population, the majority of people do not have dads. And even in the Hispanic and the white population, it evens out to, like you said, almost like a third do not have fathers in the home. So that's pretty radical. And even the people who do have fathers in the home, how many of them are really present in their lives? Really active in their child's lives and trying to be there and to be a good father figure for them.
Yeah. Wow, that's so powerful because you think of again, the responsibility sexually that we have.
Right.
And the consequences is what we're seeing, just the result of our sexuality gone wild.
Right.
And again, it's not so much the pornography.
Right.
It's the just the daily acts of people hooking up.
Right.
And getting together.
Right.
And
think about this line from the Bible. Paul says, all things are lawful for me, but not everything is edifying.
Right.
So in other words, if you really were dealing with a truly virtuous nation, there would not need to be a law, right? There would not need to be a law that says you shouldn't kill your unborn children.
Yeah, law, you always have to ask the question is, why is there laws in the first place?
Right.
And it's always predicated, your answer is always going to be predicated on what you believe about human beings.
Right.
Right?
Right.
If you believe human beings are righteous people that will do the right thing, you will say, oh, they probably don't need any law.
Right.
Because they are righteous, And that's what Paul's getting at in his writing. That now I'm under Christ, I'm under his law. Right. I don't need any outside law to govern me. Right. I got plenty of Christ in my life.
Right. Yeah.
But if you have an idea that no, humans are innately evil, and that we are by birth sinners,
right,
and bent towards destruction, then you will see a real important need for law.
Right.
Right?
Right.
And so you'll kind of look at the law and you'll go, hey, this is important that we have these laws in here because we need to restrain, the evil.
Yeah.
But then the question comes is like, if you don't have a synopsis, understanding of what evil is,
right,
then you have this. You have a woman saying at the beginning of what we played. You have a woman saying, well, what I find evil is you restricting the woman from having an abortion.
Right.
So she doesn't see so much having the abortion as being the greater evil.
Right.
To look at Thomas Aquinas's morality. Right. That idea of the double, what's it called? The double
effect.
Double effect. But, she sees that hindering someone the right to do what they want with their unborn child.
Right. So the idea is the real evil would be you asking me to take responsibility and sacrifice for another.
Right.
That's the real evil. Now listen to this. And again, it's not just the women. So the women think that way too. But even though the men aren't out there, the men are. This is how lazy the men are.
Yeah,
they won't even.
They're somewhere.
Yeah, they're so lazy that they want this more than the women do. But they're not even willing to go out there and march. They're not even willing to go out and take responsibility and ownership for their lack of responsibility in their unborn children's lives.
Isn't that weird?
It's so
it's
crazy.
It's kind of odd
if
you think about it. Like, why isn't the men of the woman, the female that had the abortion,
right?
Why aren't they at the parade?
Right. They should be.
Yeah.
They should be shouting it because they should be like, "Man, I'm off the hook,"
Yeah.
Listen to this though. So these are even more interesting.
In a real
stats.
sick way, there's a reverse kind of diss on females
right
here.
Right.
In a real sinister way, isn't there?
Yeah.
There's this real diss, almost like females are thinking that they're getting up
right
by getting the abortion. It almost has a feel
right
that they're the ones that again are getting the short end of the stick.
They are.
And the male once again
right
wins.
Right. The patriarchy.
The patriarchy wins it again.
Who decided Roe versus Wade?
The patriarchy. Yeah.
Right? Bunch of men.
Yeah, and the more women go, I want abortion, abortion rights, it still seems like it gets the men off the hook.
Right.
And the men go, yes,
yeah.
we can do what we want to do.
Yeah.
And there's the female going to the activism rally,
right.
Putting her life online, you see it all.
Right.
And you kind of get this idea that there's this invisible, the more they do it, the patriarchy just grows and grows and grows.
Right.
It's kind of a weird, sinister thought.
Yeah.
Right?
And you and I talk about this as well, where there's actually two types of bad leaders. The first type of bad leader is the one that most people think about, the authoritarian, the person who's going to force you to do whatever they want. But the second type of bad leader is the apathetic one. And there's a lot of those throughout history. The kings who just couldn't care less about their people. And they use all their power and authority just to ingratiate themselves, right? They build big old palaces for themselves and they eat a bunch of rich food and they couldn't care less about what's happening to the people underneath their rule. The men in our society, the patriarchy today, it's the latter. That's the patriarchy. It's not the authoritarian, it's the I couldn't care less. That's the patriarchy today, but it's no less effective. Now, listen to some of these effects. Children who grow up in houses without fathers, specifically fathers, they're 4 times greater to live lives in intense poverty. They're 7 times more likely to become pregnant as a teenager. They are more likely to have behavioral problems, more likely to face abuse and neglect. They have 2 times greater risk of dying as an infant. They have a far greater likelihood of giving into drug and alcohol abuse. They're more likely to go to prison. They're 2 times more likely to suffer obesity. They're far more likely to commit crime than their peers. 2 times more likely to drop out of high school. Right? So that's the effect of the fathers, the men, saying like, I don't really want to be a part of this.
Yeah.
I'm going to get my girl pregnant. And, if she doesn't have an abortion, maybe I'll send her money if the state makes me, but otherwise I'm just not going to be present. I'm not going to do anything. And that is like really tragic. And one of the main reasons why I was really wanting to talk to you about this is because you have a very unique story to a lot of people. Mm-hmm. Where I had a dad and his dad abandoned him and just wasn't in his life. And then obviously my dad was in my life and was a very good father throughout my entire life. But you have a very unique story where you had a dad who was both. You had the negligent father for some of your life, but then you had the present father for some of your life.
That's right.
So you have a very unique perspective to see what it's like to be with and without a father.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And I was very fortunate to have, someone always present.
Right.
And at times not so present, if you get my drift, just with the alcoholism and the violence and all that. But no, I think there's a lot of things, me and my brother both, and we both have interesting stories, because I ended up leaving my mother and my brother, at a young age, and I think I really, saw a lot of hate in my heart towards my dad early on in my life. I just was disgusted by him. And I was disgusted by my family. I was disgusted by what I saw. And there was a lot of hatred there. And I, as a young person, I didn't know how to deal with it. So I dealt with it like what many young people did. And that is just to go find people that look at everything and say, forget it. And we're just going to, do drugs and give everybody the middle finger,
right?
Kind of attitude. And I don't know if that's so much the way, I think that's how we dealt with a lot of our depression and a lot of our anxiety back then, is we didn't have internet. We didn't get on like internet tribal communities.
Right.
We had to find people in our elementary school who really had that kind of attitude as well. And, it was easy to find them for me because they kind of had the same attitudes as me and that kind of thing. And I wonder how they process this today, like how, young men process it today, not having a dad and what that's like. But, then later on in my life, my teenage years, having a dad, in my starting to really get a solid footing with a father figure from 14 on, really laying some good foundations. Man, it was amazing how, that was so awesome and amazing and stabilitating as I had to go through all the weird stuff that I was involved in because of trying to deal with everything that I grew up with. So I could certainly see where having a dad who's present, who loves you, who's affirming, in the sense that not that he's affirming of everything you do,
right,
but he's affirming of who you are in your position in the family.
Right.
So let me get that straight. Yeah, my dad wasn't the guy who said, "Hey, I just love you no matter, you can do whatever you want,"
right,
that kind of thing.
Right.
But just having a dad who said, "Hey, I'm your dad, and I love you,
right,
and you are my son, and I'm sorry for what I did in the past." Boy, those words, even just me saying those coming out of my mouth now, they mean something. Right. I can think back and go, man, those things were lifesavers.
Right. And there's so many good things you just said there that I want to hone in on
when
it comes to fatherhood. The first thing that you said is the idea of affirmation, like being present and affirming. Jordan Peterson, who's a Canadian psychologist, he says that one of the main roles that fathers have that's unique to the mother is mothers are very good because their natural maternal and nurturing instincts of affirming children exactly as they are. But the problem is that could be so extreme sometimes that it becomes enabling, where it really is like, I'm gonna love you and support you no matter what you do, even if it is bad stuff. What dads are really good at is they're good at affirming a kid where they are. Not as good as the mom, but they are good at it. But they're also good at pushing a child to their potential. So in other words, giving the child the feeling of not only I'm accepted, but I could be better, right? I could do more than what I'm currently doing. My life could be different than what it is right now. Do you see any of that?
Yeah, absolutely. Early on, I saw it maybe in some sports when my dad was, his alcoholism was going nuts, but even there I saw him just so aloof and kind of becoming more detached and more, going down the addictive road where, it became embarrassing sometimes to see him at the ball field and, that kind of thing. And so, you didn't have those moments with your dad. You wouldn't, your dad wasn't really capable, of any kind of direction, life direction. I don't remember anything really about my dad ever talking to me about life growing up.
Yeah.
I don't remember any young conversations of him ever, talking to me about things like that, not at all. But as I got older and he sobered up and everything, and I went and lived with my biological dad, who by this time was sober, I certainly had so many good talks with him and amazing dialogues. And they were all about very wisdom-like talks. He was always very thoughtful to listen, but he was always very good at pushing me in directions to make me think. And I always found that fascinating. And it was good. It was even on government things, on healthcare issues, and how, what is the ruling power like, and why he didn't trust government,
right?
And why he didn't trust big corporations, and why he was skeptical of things. And he would talk about the inner issues of like, he would say like the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And he would talk about what that means, and he wasn't a Christian,
right?
But he would use these principles, and so it challenged me to think. And that's something that I don't remember my mom doing so much. My mom had other beautiful attributes in her life, but I certainly remember my dad, when he sobered up. Man, he was a teacher. It was awesome.
Yeah. And, and likewise with me and my dad, he's very good. Men tend to have this quality. It's called disagreeableness, where men are actually comfortable not fully agreeing with someone else. Like, we feel a comfortability there. Women tend to want to agree about everything. They want to have like unity and harmony. They want to get along. Men are okay saying like, hey, I don't see it your way, and maybe even getting passionate about it and saying like, no, dude, you're wrong. Like getting into a little bit of a fight, but still respecting one another. Women have a harder time with that. So yeah, I remember that as a kid. Like, my dad would always push my ideas, like, why do you think that way? What is this? And trying to help me think through some of my own worldviews and preconceived notions.
Yeah, which is vital. And that so many kids probably don't have that growing up in their teenage years. Right. And that's what I I go, wow, I am fortunate that my dad sobered up, and in most of my teenage years I had a dad who was there, really present. But we can't overlook that what we're seeing today in our world is just really the result of, in a sense, the reaping and sowing kind of principle, right?
Right.
Whatever a person sows, that he's going to reap.
Right.
And the nation, of course, collectively is going to reap, the issues. And it's funny. It's like we tend to think that education is the answer.
Right.
In this country, we tend to think like, hey, you know what? It doesn't matter what your background is.
Yeah, the state's your dad.
That's right.
The school's your dad.
That's right. If we get you into the university,
yeah,
that's going to help you out.
Right.
But, it seems like we always come out not balanced.
Right.
We all still come out with all these different flaws, and but now we just have maybe a little more self-righteousness because we've graduated.
Right.
And we have a piece of paper.
Right.
And we find that we've accomplished something, but it doesn't produce a good righteousness. It produces a self-righteousness.
Yeah.
And that happens in a lot of us too.
Right. So next thing I wanted to point out is when you were talking about how your dad kind of challenged you. There's this interesting statistic when it comes to like female police officers, and I think it's really interesting. It's really fascinating. And it's also true for like moms who are alone, like single mothers, where you actually find that female police officers use more lethal force than males do. And the reason is actually because of that size and physicality difference between them and criminals. And by the way, just so people know, I'm not harping on women. This is also true for more like slender and slight male officers. But the idea is that if you don't have a naturally imposing presence, then people will take advantage of that, meaning people will naturally see that as weakness and they'll push you a little harder than they would someone who has a naturally imposing presence.
Makes sense.
And you have to respond with more aggression, and it could actually turn violent sometimes. So a lot of kids who grew up in homes with single moms, especially like Latino families, where the mom is really the main person there, they might experience a lot of abuse. You know, I remember talking to a lot of my buddies because at CDO, I went to Canyon del Oro, and we're right in between, you know, like the Oro Valley, like super white community of Tucson. But then on the other side is Oracle, which is like almost 100% Hispanic. And so our school was like this weird meld where it was 50% from Oracle and 50% from Oro Valley.
Which is, yeah, a lot of schools, very diverse.
Yeah, very diverse. And it was interesting, like talking to some of these guys, you know, and even if the dad was in the home, the mom was still like the person. And they would talk to me about, you know, these big Latino women just like beating them and stuff. You know, it's not funny, but yeah, they would like get hit really hard. And it's not really because these women were abusive, but it's because especially boys, they challenge their moms a little bit more. They feel like they could get away with more.
Yeah.
And the mom has to meet that with more aggression.
Oh, yeah. I mean, anybody who's grew up in my era, we remember Eddie Murphy's famous delirious talks.
Right.
Or about the woman who takes off her shoe and chucks it at her kid.
Right.
You know?
Right. And the benefit is kind of interesting where the men, one of the reasons what they found that the father has in the household is he has a natural imposing presence, meaning he doesn't have to. He doesn't have to become violent to intimidate his children.
Yeah, just his size alone.
Right, his size, his demeanor, and just the general tone of voice.
Yeah, tone of voice.
Can like actually inspire a lot of respect in children without him having to try. Now, men who don't know that, meaning men who didn't receive that from their fathers, they tend to be more violent in the household. So what happens is when you grow up with a father who does that and does that well, then you realize like, oh, aggression doesn't necessarily have to become violent. Like I can be with my child, I could be, you know, intimidating to them without ever having to yell, to scream, or to hit. You know, I could actually intimidate just with my presence.
Yeah,
and with just like my hands sometimes, you know, just grabbing them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was thinking like I was having a flashback of maybe one of Jordan Peterson's videos of him talking about the importance of, you know, rolling with your kids.
Right.
And wrestling
like
with
playing
them.
With them, yeah.
Yeah, it's like play fighting with them.
Right.
You know, that you're the big guy.
Right.
You know, you're the dad.
Right.
But your kid's learning something about you.
Right.
You know, you're being aggressive, but they know you're not being too aggressive.
Right.
You know, and they see your temperance.
Right.
And that all plays a role into how they're perceiving things.
Right. And that's actually a biblical virtue. We call it meekness, right? The ability to have power, but to not use it to dominate or subdue. And, you know, speaking of the patriarchy earlier on, a lot of people don't have dads like that, meaning they don't have dads who are in control of their anger. They have dads who are violent and dads who scream, who do yell, who do hit, and they don't know how to hold back their strength towards their children. Or dads, like I said, who are the second type of patriarchs who just run away, don't help out at all. But either way, the children aren't receiving that really vital lesson. So, you know, with my dad, even though he grew up in an abusive home and all that stuff, never hit us, never abused us. But there was a difference. I still have this really distinct memory as a kid where my mom, you know, and she's a tough lady, you know, she's Asian, she's tough. And I was being disrespectful as I usually was with my mom. and she started spanking me, and being the little belligerent kid I was, I started laughing. So she got really upset, but I just like laughed and walked away. I just remember my dad coming in my room, and I'm just like, oh gosh,
Here
like,
it comes.
I'm in it now.
The bomb is dropping.
And he doesn't. My dad didn't have to hit me hard. He didn't have to use his strength.
No.
But just my dad being there, his presence.
Yeah, just his grip alone.
Just his grip, like, and I was like, oh, I'm in it, And I couldn't get that from my mom.
Yeah.
And it's not that my mom's not a tough lady. It's just that she could never do that.
Yeah.
And if my mom didn't have my dad there, she probably would have had, with a kid like me especially, she would have probably had to resort to more violent measures to get my attention.
Yeah, and it's almost like the issues that people talk about, whether it's police brutality, quote, issues, or whatever issues that they're saying, the CRT issues of today, of critical race theory and all this, it really all goes back to, a lot of times of just how dads, about dads, why aren't dads there?
Right.
And it comes back to a lot of us, to a lot of us people thinking about these issues. It comes back to our, quote, maybe the way we look at sexuality.
Right.
And maybe the way we really think through this.
Right.
Do we really think sexual autonomy is good?
It's the greatest good. Yeah.
It's the greatest good.
Yeah.
And again, the scary thing is if you say, well, no, I don't think sexual autonomy is the greatest good, and let's move away from sexual autonomy. The problem is if you do not have a system of God regulating any sexuality,
right,
then you force the hand of government to regulate people's sexuality.
That's right.
And then now we start getting into Brave New World.
That's right.
Now we start getting into a world where, we'll get rid of abortions.
Right.
Yeah, you want to get rid of abortions now? We'll get rid of them right now.
Right.
But this is the system we're going to set up.
Right.
How about every pregnancy is going to be artificially inseminated?
Right.
How about every person is going to be, let's say, somehow doctored up, or, we're going to, put a shot in you that affects whether you're sterile or not.
Right.
Or the only way you can be sterile is for a period of time to, go into a clinic and, put something into a jar.
Right.
And then you will get a shot where you become, sterile, again. That way anybody who is pregnant by full-blown volition, wanting to have the pregnancy, under a doctor's care, under a clinic's care, under an industry's care. You can see where this is going.
Right.
Giant capitalism meets government equal fun, totalitarian, dystopian world.
And it is interesting when you see these totalitarian regimes, whether it's, with Hitler and the Nazis, or with Lenin or Stalin or Mao, or even some of the more ancient ones with the pharaohs of Egypt and things like that. There's a weird, perverse thing where the king, like the monarch, becomes like the father, where people see him, like when you see people talk about Mao, it's like they see them as like the father.
Yeah, they want to get their picture taken with them. And
right.
It's like very family-oriented feeling. It's stuff.
Really weird. It's really bizarre. Where people don't do that with Joe Biden. Like
no.
No one's like, oh, like Joe Biden's like my dad. Like
right.
That's no one thinks that way. And even if it wasn't
Trump,
even
with
Trump, it wasn't going to be like that.
Yeah, Trump ain't your dad.
Yeah, he's not your dad. He's your politician.
He's your crazy uncle.
Yeah, and like. Yeah, one of these political commentators, he made a funny comment. He's like, if you're looking to your politicians for empathy, that tells me a lot about your home life. Meaning if your politicians are not your friend, they're not your family members. They are a disinterested third party who is out for their own political self-interest. And so if you don't have that kind of empathy and stuff at home, and you are starting to look at the government and the state and the institutions of the state as being like your surrogate father, that says a lot about where you're coming from. Like that's where you're getting that stability.
Yeah.
And it's a very scary way that our culture's going. And like you said with the Brave New World, that's how it was. You didn't have a mother or father. You were grown in a lab. You were just put out, and the state was your parent. The state taught you. And there's an even scarier way that could go, though. Denzel Washington, I love Denzel Washington. He's an awesome actor. I could pretty much watch any movie that has Denzel in it. He's probably one of my favorite actors out there. He was asked about his success in his career. And you could tell the people who are questioning him, they're like white liberals, and they're like, oh, how difficult was it for you to like make it in this white dominated culture and stuff like that? And he's just like, not really that hard. And they're like, really? He's like, well, I mean, obviously I got to work hard. I put a lot of effort into what I do. I take it very seriously. But he's like, but I had a dad. I had a father at home. And I don't really see being black as being something that disadvantages me. But there's a lot of my friends who are disadvantaged because they don't have a dad. And he said something really profound. He said, if you don't have a dad in the home, you will find your father on the streets. So in other words, a lot of these kids, the reason why they go into gangs so young,
sure,
or into crews or whatever, is because they don't have that strong male figure at home, and so they find one at the playground, in the whatever on the streets. They find that teenager who's more mature than them, who they're like, whoa, like, and they look up to them.
Yeah.
And that becomes their world.
Yeah, and every crew has even your elementary,
right.
Little Rascals crew
right.
has the top person.
Right, the alpha,
Has the alpha that we're all looking at, and we're all, that's the one who can get us in. Yeah, so, abortion's one of those issues that it brings up so many things.
Right.
So many topics to touch on, and
right.
this podcast, we certainly have touched on so many different avenues.
And that's the way we want people to think, like I think a lot of Christians, they stop at the morality of an issue and they don't go beyond, and it's not that morality is a bad thing to talk about. It's good to talk about, is abortion moral? Is sex before marriage moral? Is, homosexuality moral? Like, it's good to talk about those things in relation to the Bible. But if you don't push it a little bit and say like, okay, it's immoral, great. But what are the underlying societal issues that are pushing us towards these decisions? What are the effects and repercussions of those things?
Yeah.
And how can we live in a society that promotes stuff like this? Because even if we choose not to live in it, that doesn't mean people around us aren't. And it doesn't mean we're not going to make moral mistakes within all these categories and errors. So you could be a Christian and totally agree that abortion is morally bad, but you may have had an abortion, or you might be considering one right now, because you've made a mistake in your life, you've made a terrible error, and you're starting to see the consequences that might occur for you to have to take care of your child, whether you're a man or a woman.
Yeah.
And even though morally I should do this, you don't know how practically to not do it, to say like, I'm going to suffer because 1 Peter 4, I'm going to arm myself with the same mindset that was in Christ. For he who has suffered in the flesh has abstained from sin. Jesus, when he looked at the cross, he was realistic. This is suffering. This is sacrifice. But it's sacrifice with a purpose. And that's what parenting is. Parenting is an imitation of Christ.
Yeah.
Because we are dying to self. We are dying to our dreams, our hopes, our ambitions. We're shaping them now in relation to our children.
Yeah, which grows love, actually. Right. Love can't grow unless you go this route. I want to mention, too, that I always bring up, or I like to bring up, a writing that I did called The Ethic of Imitation and Future Benefit. Because I really think every time have just been sitting on this, and I've been sitting on this book now for like 5 years on publishing this thing, sitting on the thoughts. But I keep going back to this section on the ethic of imitation and future benefit as really a way to see if our morality is good or not.
Right.
Is it something to be imitated? Is there a future benefit to it?
Right.
What if everybody imitated you?
Right.
What if everybody got abortions?
Right.
What if every baby was aborted? And I think those are good ways to measure whether something's really right or wrong.
Right. Because if your morality hinges on people doing something different than you for society to succeed, it should tell you something about your morality.
Right. There should be something, that kind of idea well within the conversation of whether something's good morally in the society or whether it's bad.
Right. So like take the thief, for instance. The thief can only steal equity and capital that's already in existence, meaning if everybody was a thief, there would be nothing to steal.
Right.
Because there would be nothing produced.
That's right.
So the thief the thief's livelihood is dependent.
Yeah.
It's contingent on people not behaving like them. And the same thing is true with the person who's like, well, I don't want responsibility for children, so I'm not going to have kids and I'm not going to do this. Your lifestyle is contingent on people not making that same decision.
Right. Yeah. And that's an interesting thing.
Right.
And so that's why I wrote that. Anyway, the ethic of imitation and future benefit.
Man.
Yeah, that's right. I think it's on my Bean podcast, just the audio of it.
Oh, nice.
But, yeah, I just put it up there just to check out. Anyway, you guys have a great one. Yeah. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.
Check out runninglight.org to begin our 2 video series, Take Flight and Love or Lust. You can also send us questions on Twitter at Running Light or on our runninglight.org podcast page. Like us on Facebook at Running Light Ministries, Psalm 36:8. They are abundantly satisfied with the fullness of your house, and you give them drink from the river of your pleasures.